Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Oh, I see some faces that I know too, so thank you all for coming today. Like she said, I'm Winnie Hemphill, and I'm the president of Southview Cemetery. So I have a little presentation here. We're going to talk about Southview and then talk maybe a little bit about my family history, depending on the time that we have. So this is a picture of our angel, and the angel was dedicated on our 75th anniversary. And Marissa said we've been here 132 years. On April 21st, we will celebrate our 139th year. So here is the sign that sits out in front of the cemetery saying that we were chartered April 21st of 1886. So we're looking forward to next year we'll be 140 years old. So this was the original 25 acres. Back in 1886, my great-great-grandfather, whose name was Albert Watts, buried his mother, who was also born enslaved, and she was buried at Oakland Cemetery in 1880. Oakland doesn't exactly know where she is, but we did find some records at Oakland saying Mrs. E.A. Watts had been buried at Oakland. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to turn this phone off, excuse me. I've got my work calls also on that phone. So also she was buried, we found a record that said Mrs. E.A. Watts was buried in 1880 at Oakland, but we're not sure where at Oakland she's buried. And he also buried his father, who came out of slavery with him. His name was Sterling Watts, in 1883, and he buried him in an area called Rest Haven that was advertised at Westview as being a perpetual care portion of their cemetery for African Americans. And when I checked with Westview, they weren't sure where that area was. I was told on a recent tour that somebody has found that area, and I'm going to have to follow up on that. But for those two reasons, I believe he wasn't satisfied with burial practices for African Americans in Atlanta, and he decided to gather some businessmen in the basement of Friendship Baptist Church to discuss the problem and how it could be solved. And so they came up with the idea of having a cemetery, and we're right off Jonesboro Road in Atlanta. We're about 15 minutes from downtown Atlanta, maybe 5 minutes from Georgia State. So they started a stockholder corporation. I'm going to go back one. Well, I don't know how. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go back one. This is what the historic part of the cemetery looks like now. It's an overview and an eye-level view. Many of the lots are family purchase lots, and they have walls. And it looks like a European cemetery at that time in the 1880s. The overview just kind of shows you a visual from higher up, from a drone picture. But in 1886, they decided to raise capital by selling stock. And this is a picture of the share of stock, or a share of stock that was purchased by Lewis G. Watts, who was my grandfather, and signed by A.F. Herndon, who was Alonzo Herndon. He was the secretary, and Ben Townsley was the president of the Cemetery Association, and it shows he bought one share and it was worth $1,000. And so they were trying to raise $10,000. But in 1886, Albert Watts went to this area on Jonesboro Road and purchased the original 25 acres. It was in his name originally, and then it was granted to the corporation, which was Southview Cemetery Corporation. In 1961, a building was opened on the property site. Before that, the property for the cemetery, if you wanted to have a burial there or wanted to buy cemetery property, you had to go on Auburn Avenue in the Oddfellows building. So there was not an office at the cemetery, and this was a big deal for us. They erected this angel, and at the bottom of the angel, they made it dedicated to the founders and had the founder's name on it. And also they had an office behind it with running water. So you go to the bathroom when you went to the cemetery. And these are the names of the founders: Jacob McKinley, Robert Grant, Albert Watts, George W. Graham, Charles H. Morgan, and John Render. And it says, who granted a charter for the cemetery on April 21st, 1886, to provide a respectable place for Christian burials. There are more than just Christians buried there, but of course, Christian burials in 1886 was pretty much the whole African American community in Atlanta at that time. We have since grown to over 100 acres, and we have about 400 burials every year. And this is a overhead view of what the cemetery looks like now. Martin Luther King was our first very well-known person who was buried at Southview. That's his picture. He was buried there April 4th. Well, he passed on April 4th. He was actually buried later that week in 1968. The front of his crypt had his full name across the front of it. He was buried there with a 24-hour guard. I don't know who paid for the guard. I've been trying to do that research, but it was the city of Atlanta who helped have the people there for 24-hour guards. And so he had a lot of visitors while he was there. This is from the actual service. And these are visitors that came, I think, on the 1-year anniversary of his passing. But there was a lot of activity at the cemetery when he was there because of his burial there. He was well known internationally, not just in Atlanta. So he was kind of our first well-known person. Of course, in 1970, he was moved to the King Center. And there were writings originally that Coretta had that she wanted to have a center for nonviolence that would be built somewhere near his birth home. And so he was moved there in 1970. Hank Aaron came to Southview in 2021. He's buried about 3 graves over from where Dr. King was, and also in the crypt where Dr. King was, his parents are now buried there. So they utilized that crypt, and it has a different face now that shows his mother, who was murdered in the church in 1974, and his father, who died of natural causes in 1984. But Hank Aaron helped to pick out the crypt where he was going to be buried. We didn't know that his date of passing would be coming up so soon, but we had started making arrangements for this crypt. It actually wasn't erected for a year, and so he was moved to his final resting place a year later on the anniversary of his passing. Everybody knows who Hank Aaron is? I had a group of 13-year-olds, and I said, and this is where Hank Aaron is, and they had a puzzled look like, who is? I said, do you all know Hank Aaron? They were like, no. So I had to explain who the home run king was. So, I want to ask. Also, Congressman John Lewis is buried there. He was buried in 2020, big ceremony. John Lewis selected this headstone that's on his gravesite because his wife passed a few years before. He liked the shards of glass in the middle and actually imported it from Germany. So it's a one-of-a-kind in the United States. But he felt like those shards of glass created different images and showed all of the different perspectives that people have. And we have a lot of visitors there to visit John Lewis and his wife Lillian. Alonzo Herndon is there, and he was an early millionaire. He was the first black millionaire in Atlanta. He was born a slave in Social Circle, Georgia. And when slavery ended, he walked to Atlanta. He gained most of his money initially as being a barber. And he had several barbershops, including one on Peachtree Street called the Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace was well known, but it catered to white customers and did all the tonsillary work for white patrons. It was very well known and very lucrative. He then started the Atlanta Life Corporation, which was at one time the largest African American insurance corporation in the United States. But he's buried there along with his wife, his first wife, his second wife, and his son, and his mother. We have a Tuskegee Airman there. We have several, but this one is Walter Westmoreland, and he was a red tail flyer. He went to Europe and was actually shot down in Europe and died there. They had him missing in action for a long time, but they did locate that his body had been buried in Belgium. And so they notified his parents, and his father had been ill, and his father passed with the news that his son was actually deceased. And so they had a double burial at Southview for Walter Westmoreland and his father. We had dignitaries come from from Iran, to place a marker at his gravesite. And this was a picture of some of the Tuskegee Airmen who were alive at that time. So we do tours, 2 annually every year, but we will do tours if requested at any time. We've had family reunions and family groups and school groups come out and do tours. So if you're interested in a tour, we'll try to make one available for you and focus on the people that you're interested in. We recently had a guided walking tour. We had one of the participants today saying that she came for Phoenix Flies. And in March, we do Phoenix Flies, and it's usually about women buried at Southview. And so this last tour we did had Lizzie McDuffie. We had an actress portraying Lizzie McDuffie, and she was a White House maid for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She has a fantastic story. She was raised in Atlanta and had to drop out of high school and became a maid. She worked at the Swan House for 23 years, and then she married a man who was the valet. His name was Irvin McDuffie, who's a valet for FDR. And so she was actually with FDR at the Little White House in Georgia when he passed, and was on the train which brought his body back. But she has a fantastic story. I would love for you to hear that. I'm sure we will redo that one and let you find out all about her life. Also, Dinah Watts Pace. You might notice the middle name or the maiden name is Watts. She was my Aunt Dinah, but she was born a slave and ended up having an orphanage in Covington. Covington, Georgia, had the first Black orphanage because of Dinah Watts Pace. So she was portrayed. And Vaseline Usher was an early educator and also a Girl Scout, a founder of the Girl Scouts for African Americans. So she was a Girl Scout director in Atlanta and helped start the first Black troop in Atlanta. And then Jewel Simon was a well-known artist in Atlanta. She studied under Hale Woodruff and had beautiful paintings. So we try to bring out the stories of African American women who are buried at Southview so that we relearn our history and so that we make it available to people. Also, there are Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, who is one of the people elected to the Georgia House of Representatives during Reconstruction, and he wasn't allowed to be seated. He was also one of the first Black priests or ministers in the military. Geneva Hogger Brooks, too fast. Geneva Hogger Brooks was an early mortician. And I like to bring out the stories of women because even though a lot of history isn't recorded, even less history of Black women is recorded. But she was an entrepreneur. She had $200 of her own and borrowed $100 and started her own mortuary in Atlanta, was a philanthropist, donated to a lot of causes. There was a school named for her, the Hogger Brooks School, in early Atlanta days. And her business was on Auburn Avenue. And it survived until 1999 when her great-nephew decided to leave the mortuary business. Grace Towns Hamilton was the first Black woman elected to the city council. And she was very instrumental in public housing, in expanding the Grady to accommodate African Americans, middle-class African Americans. But she's buried at Southview as well. And then Mattawilda Dobbs Jansen is from the Dobbs family. Her dad was John Wesley Dobbs, and she had 5 sisters. There were 6 girls in that family, and all of them did great things. But Mattawilda Dobbs was had a beautiful voice, and she was an opera singer. And so she sang all over the world. She sang at La Scala, and she's well written up. She was the first African American woman to have a year-long contract with the Metropolitan Opera. Of course, we know who Julian Bond was, and he is buried there along with his parents. And his father was a historian and the president of 2 HBCUs. And then Julian Bond was a civil rights leader and a SNCC volunteer and a freedom rider. And then Williams Holmes Borders, I think we misspelled Holmes there. You always look at your slides carefully. But Williams Holmes Borders was the minister at Wheat Street Baptist Church and was an early civil rights leader. He started the Wheat Street Towers that are still existing and a home for people to live in. But he did a lot of things around Atlanta that made Atlanta the place that it is now. We started in 2004 the Historic Southview Preservation Foundation, and it's a not-for-profit 501c3. We raise money through the foundation to help maintain the historic area. The historic area is non-perpetual care. So that means when you purchase a grave at our cemetery now, it's in the perpetual care area. That means it's going to be taken care of forever. A portion of the funds are put aside in a account that also has the Secretary of State's name on it. But back in 1886, they didn't have the idea that a company would take care of the graves. And so families would come out twice a year and mow and plant and exchange stories and exchange, valuable information to their loved ones. But there wasn't the idea of it being perpetual care. So the cemetery keeps the historic area cut, but it needs more than that. Some of those walls are over 100 years old, and they are beginning to crumble a little bit and fall. And also people were buried in boxes back then rather than in vaults. So it's less stable land. Even though they've been buried for a long time, it continues to deteriorate. And so some of the headstones have toppled, and they are huge. And then, of course, all the vegetation that's there. So that foundation was developed to kind of maintain that area a little better. It is our jewel and our diamond, so we really do try to invest in it. But the foundation does that as well. And the foundation is the one that puts on the tours. So the tours that I mentioned, we have the women's tour in March with Phoenix Flies. And then we have a tour in September. This year it's going to be September 20th. And it generally focuses on the 1906 race massacre. And so it will again this year. But that's around the time that occurred. And we have many people at Southview who either were involved in the history then or survived it, or we have several people who didn't survive it. And we have actors to tell their stories. So we hope you'll put that on your calendar or get on our mailing list and find out about the tour. That one is also free. We have a book that was written and published maybe about 10 years ago now. It's called Southview, an African American City of the Dead. It was written by Dr. D.L. Henderson. I think you can find it on Amazon, but if you can't, you can always come to the cemetery office and we have it for sale there as well. Any questions about the cemetery or our history? I know I talked a lot. Any of you all have relatives buried at Southview? I see a few. Okay.
I have about 25.
All right. Well, so do I. Yeah. Okay. Well, it is.
How much space do you have available remaining? Do you see this continuing as far as being active for burials?
We do see it continuing as active for burials. We have at least 8 acres across the street that we have to get zoned to begin cemetery burials across there. But it's over 100 acres, and we probably have about 20 acres left. Some of it is wooded, and so I'm not sure that we would take down trees to bury, but that's probably for the next person in my role to determine. We have plenty for now. The front of the cemetery is very popular and is running out of space, so we are building another mausoleum in that area. We built a mausoleum that opened in 2009, and it's about full. So if people have family members in the front of the cemetery, then we would suggest that they get a mausoleum space. That's where I bought mine. Yes, sir.
How many burials?
We have about 400 burials a year.
No, but
Oh, total? Over 80,000.
80,000.
80,000, yes.
That's Westview is only 125,000. So that's amazing. It's huge.
Yeah, we're about the same age as Westview. They started 3 years before us.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, they have probably 300 acres at Westview that's been developed. Right, and we have 100 acres.
You're not nearly as big.
No, we're not nearly as big.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the presentation. Do you have a relationship with the African American Historical and Genealogy?
OGS?
Society? OGS.
Yes, we do have a relationship with OGS. They have been out to get members to come to OGS and to know about OGS during some of our tours. And so, yeah, we do have a relationship with them. I keep planning to join, but I will join this year.
Another question, is your office open all the time?
No, our office hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday,
But
and then we're open on Saturday. We're not open at all on Sunday.
you're open most, all of those hours?
Yeah, we are.
You have somebody that can help you find graves?
Yeah, we have, if you want to locate a grave, you have to come between 9 and 3:30 because we do leave at 5. And when we leave, we close the gates behind us. So Sundays is the only day the office isn't open, and we answer the phone on Sundays too.
But you are open on Sunday?
No, the office, the gravesite is open on Sundays. If you know where you're going, you're welcome to come on Sunday. Yeah, but the office to show graves is there Saturday mornings and then during the week, Monday through Friday. Yes?
You said you wanted to do some investigating at Westview Cemetery. Have you met Jeff Clemens?
I believe I have. I have not met him in a long time. I've been at Southview for 20 years now, and I did this kind of investigation early in my term at Southview. So I will have to go back out and meet him again.
Really, really nice guy, and probably the #1 expert on Westview.
Okay.
So it might be a great resource. Such a nice guy.
All right. I will reach out to him. Jeff Collins, right?
Clemens.
Clemens. Okay. Jeff Clemens. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry that you said it since I was late. I knew you have special days at the cemetery, like when we put the flags and wreaths out. What other days do you have?
Okay, well, we do, we're coordinated with Wreaths Across America, which is a national organization. And so we provide wreaths for the veterans that are buried there, and there are so many veterans there. We do special tours this year for Memorial Day. We had a group that came out and placed flags on all of the veterans' graves. So we do things periodically depending on who contacts us. Like today, we were going to have a tour at Southview. I think it was one day in January, but it was a terrible day, and the weather was just not permitting. So we have regular things that are scheduled, like the 2 tours that we talked about. We do Wreaths Across America every year. We volunteer or have volunteers come in with Trees Atlanta on Martin Luther King Day. On that Monday, the office is closed, and we dedicate that to Martin Luther King Jr.'s memory. And then we do something for Juneteenth. So this year we're going to have a tour for Juneteenth. We were going to have a praise house that was going to open across the street, but we're having a little issue with the zoning for that, so I don't think that's going to come to fruition. But every year for Juneteenth we do something as well.
You know, your email address.
You can, yeah. Yeah, it's Winnie at southviewcemetery.com. But I got cards, and it'll be on the screen in a minute. Anybody else questions about this? Let's see what time are we getting to?
What is the date of the next tour?
The next tour is going to be September 20th. It's a Saturday. It's going to be at 4:30. And if you call the office, you can get on the distribution list for that tour. We don't send out a whole lot of stuff, so don't be afraid to give us your email address. Do you have a question?
Do you guys have any other community programming besides tours? Like I know, for example, at the Oakland Cemetery, sometimes they do installations with artists on the grounds. Do you guys do anything like that?
We don't have a standard program that we do other than those 2 tours that I was speaking about. Our anniversary this year and our anniversary next year are definitely going to have some big things related to them. But we will create whatever a group is interested in. So we had a Jack and Jill group from DeKalb County, from Stone Mountain, that came out with their kids and put flags on all the veterans' graves in November for Veterans Day. We kind of tailor it to what they're interested in. We had a mothers group come out and plant flowers at Babyland. So it's not a standing thing, but we will create whatever you're interested in. We don't have a standing group of people who just do the tours and that kind of thing, the foundation work. We kind of do it in the office as well, between working with families who have had a loss. Yeah. Yes.
I would just like to share one other thing that they do because it was so much. Southview is it. Years ago, I got a communication that they were going to have a play. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'll go to the cemetery for a play. And I got there and it was outstanding. Now, it wasn't a packed audience, it was outside. But when it comes to Southview, they do it. They do it. Thank you, Winnie. You definitely do it.
Thank you so much.
How old is your office area? Because that's, I know they have some old stone, that's pretty old, isn't it?
It was opened in 1961, and then it was expanded. That was our 75th anniversary, and then it was expanded maybe 6 years later.
Now, when you go out toward the back, I don't know what it is here, going toward the back lots, there's little buildings out that way too.
There's one building back there. I honestly don't know when it was built or why it was built. It has bathrooms and storage in it. We are applying for our registry, National Historic Registry. And so I'm getting questions like this from the group that's helping us apply for it. And I'm doing research to try to figure out when was that building built? Were you here when it was built? It's somewhere in the 70s that it was built. And that whole back area we call the Sunset Garden was purchased around that time as well. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have slaves that were buried there from the early 1830s up until 1865?
No. My great-grandfather was born a slave. And so there are people who were slaves and then came out of slavery. And so we didn't start burying until 1886. Yeah. So I had some information about my family, and I'll just run through that kind of quickly. You asked about Oggs, and I had started doing my genealogy. So my family is the Watts family. That's my maiden name, and my great-grandfather was Albert Watts, who helped start the cemetery. And so this is a picture of Albert Watts and of his wife, my great-grandmother, Sarah Andrews Watts. They were born enslaved. I had a woman one day tell me, I didn't think slaves looked like that. But this is what they looked like, and they were definitely enslaved. They were enslaved in Athens, Georgia. They came out of slavery when she was a young woman, and he was in his 20s. And they were married. This is their marriage certificate, and they were married September 12, 1878. They end up having 5 girls and 1 son, and their son is my great-grandfather, or my grandfather. No, my great-grandfather. In my family, all the men's names were Albert and Louis, and then my father was Charles, so there are lots of generations of Alberts, Louises, and Charleses in the Watts family. I found in the Freedmen's Bureau records where Albert Watts had a record, and it told me some interesting information. Prior to that, I didn't know the name of his father, Sterling. It says he was born in Monroe, Georgia, and Emily, who was born in Athens, Georgia. So Emily is the woman that's buried at Oakland, and Sterling is the man who's buried at Westview. I also found out from Albert Watts's Freedmen's Bureau that he had some half-brothers and sisters, which I had heard stories about in my family. So this one is one of his half-brothers, Henry, who was a friend and lived actually in his home for a little while. They lived together. But I didn't know growing up about that part of the family. We found out about that. It was kind of a rumor, but I was able to verify it through the records in the Freedmen's Bureau. This next one shows that Albert decided he wanted to be a voter and registered to vote in 1867. And this showed just some articles that I found about his life in Atlanta. He was the administrator of the state for Mitchell Cargile, and Mitchell Cargile was a very early funeral director in Atlanta. I think he was the first graduate from Clark's funeral director program. And then he passed in November 5th of 1903. It says where he lived at 142 Fraser Street, a highly respected Negro died last night at his home. Watts was about 65 years old and had long been a grocer in the grocery business and had amassed considerable property. He leaves a wife and 7 children. It talks about the funeral being at First Congregational Church, which is the church that I still attend. And then here, Louis G. Watts, who was my grandfather, was applied to be the administrator of Albert Watts's estate. And this was about my great-grandmother. I'm interested in women's history, so I wanted to find out about her as well. She was on the board of the Christian Temperance Union. She was actually the recording secretary. I thought that was interesting. She had a job to do in the Christian Temperance Union. She passed in 1928, in January 6, 1928. But also before then, she applied for support. She was left with 7 children when her husband passed. And so in September 6, 1905, she applied for widow support. I don't know if she got it or not. I'm still researching that. Louis Watts was my grandfather, and this is his death certificate and when he passed. You know what, this is, yeah. So his brother, Albert Watts, the founder's brother, was Louis Watts, and this is that Louis Watts. And he was a porter at the Western in the Atlantic Railroad, and he was a recipient of a handsome watch and chain from those whom he has long and faithfully served. This article about Doc Watts was also in the New York Times, and that was about his life in New York and as a Pullman porter. I thought that was interesting. Who would have thought an article could be about him? He was born a slave and a Pullman porter, and here he is with an article in the New York Times. In the article, it says that he helped support his sister, who is Dinah Watts Pace, that we talked about before. And this kind of talks about her life. All I knew about her really from the beginning was that she had an orphanage in Covington. There's a street named for her in Covington because she had the first African-American orphanage in Georgia that was in Covington. And she got dizzy one day when she was older and caught fire to the back of her petticoat. And so my dad would tell me when we were, at Christmas time, we would be burning the Christmas packaging. And he would say, don't get close to the fire like Aunt Dinah. And that's about all I remember about Aunt Dinah until I started doing research. But she got money from Wellesley College to help build this 10-room orphanage. And she bought a 100-acre farm also in Covington. And the kids would go to school during the day and farm during the afternoon and evening. She thought it was important that they have both a little education to learn how to read and write and also know how to raise crops. So that's all I have for you all today. I hope I didn't go over time too much. This is my card. I didn't put my email address on it, but I can give it to you, and I have some cards in my bag as well. We would love for you all to come out to Southview for a tour. Keep in touch with us. I'm going to do better about keeping in touch with the DeKalb History Center as well. Yes, ma'am.
I know also that Reverend A.D. King, who was Dr. King's brother, buried as well as his your son. My pit guy was Dr. Naomi Ruth King, who passed away last year.
Yes.
My question is the sister buried there too, Christine Harris?
She is. Yep, she bought a crypt on that same road where her parents are when her husband passed, and then she's there too.
Oh, and to the best of your knowledge, are there any other races, Indians or whites buried in Southview?
Yeah, there are white people buried at Southview. Many of them were married to a black woman and a white man will be buried there, but it's never been, I got a question recently, did you have to be black to be buried here, as well as did you have to be Christian to be buried there? And there were no restrictions as to race or creed. Yeah. Good questions, thank you. Anyone else have anything, any concerns? Talk about burial practices, anything?
Well, one minute, you talked about Babyland. So was that a separate section as opposed to being buried with the family, or what? How did Babyland occur?
So some people would have their babies buried with their family, but others, we have an area we call Babyland. The area we are in now started about 1983, and so we have a lot of babies buried in that area. people may not have family buried anywhere in this area, and they want to be able to come visit their babies. And so that area is specifically just for children. Oftentimes, children are buried in boxes that are not as sturdy as concrete. So we make sure in this area that we don't run tractors and trucks across it like we would during the large part of the cemetery. So they're buried in kind of soft caskets.
That must be a standard practice, because there's an area in Westview that has only babies. I think maybe, particularly when people, lose a child in childbirth, and they don't have family plots, they must preserve an area, or at least did at some point in history.
Right, and we do. That area is for baby land, and we bury them according to when they pass, so that you're not taking heavy equipment over to put a baby near some other baby. So it's just according to when they pass. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what the oldest burial is?
No, we don't know exactly where the oldest burial is. Oral history said that when they purchased this property, the first 25 acres, that a black baby passed. And so they placed the black baby in what was going to be the cemetery before it was chartered. And so during the chartering process, they went to the farms around this 25 acres to say, is it okay for this to be an African-American cemetery? And they were told by the people who own those other farms, sure, because it's tainted. That black baby died and is buried over there, so that's tainted land. We don't have any problem with you, continuing to bury on it because it's tainted. So it worked in our favor and allowed us to get the charter in 1886, but I'm not sure where that original burial was. I know the general area where they started burying, but I don't know which grave was exactly the earliest.
You mentioned burial practices too. Are you familiar with any that were like specific to Southview or like African American burial practices that maybe you don't know about?
Yeah, there are a lot of different faiths that are buried at Southview. The Muslims don't generally want a vault, but we are required to have a vault. So we have quite a few Muslim burials. There is a Muslim cemetery down the street from Southview. It's down Jonesboro Road as well. But a lot of people who are Muslim have family who are buried at Southview, and they want to be buried with their family. So they don't have caskets. They are wrapped in a gauze-looking material and placed in the ground by hand. And so we do that frequently. We also have people from the Baha'i faith that are buried there. They're the founder of the Baha'i faith in Atlanta is actually buried at Southview, Mr. Parker. So they have a few different practices as well. Yes, ma'am.
How have the tombstones evolved at Southview Cemetery?
Yeah, well, so in the early days, they had family lots with the walls around them, some kind of coping on top of the walls, and large family markers. During the 60s, we kind of stopped having the walls around the lots, so you can still have the upright family markers, but there's a whole area in the front that was opened in 61 that has family markers and maybe 6 or 8 graves around. We call it a family lot, but the individual gravestones are flat to the ground. And then as you progress to the more modern part of the cemetery, people buy one grave when someone passes, and in those sections, it's just that single flat burial marker. So we do see it evolve. And we see the personalization evolve too. There were no pictures or markers back in 1886. And so now people have pictures and want pictures and more personalized things on the markers.
Do you have any metal graves?
You have any what?
Metal graves.
Metal graves?
Metals, rather than stones.
Oh.
There are areas in Westview that are exclusively metal.
Yeah, we call it bronze, but yeah.
Bronze, yeah.
Yeah, we have it. We do. We
Are
have
they exclusive or are they mixed?
both. We have some areas that are exclusive bronze, some that are exclusive granite, and some that you can have granite or bronze.
With each generation, they have different ideas about burial, and the newest one is about the tree pods. Do you see any tree pod area anytime soon?
Tell me what you mean by tree pod.
Your remains, I think it's like cremated, they put it in a pod, the roots of a tree, and the tree's buried.
So we have areas where we do plant trees. We have not had a tree pod thus far at Southview. Cremation is more common now than it was in the past. To me, it kind of extends the life of our cemetery because we have so many families already there. So 80,000 people already there. As their grandchildren and great-grandchildren pass and decide to get cremated, they can put those cremated ashes on top of grandma's grave. We do a lot of that now.
I didn't realize I had relative persons like that.
Yeah.
She's buried in one place, and right next to her is the cremated remains of her daughter.
Right. So that allows us to kind of extend the functionality of the cemetery as well.
I don't know the bear fall, but that is in your form. You can keep the ashes and you can get a tree and plant it, so. But I'm guessing you guys haven't done.
We haven't done a tree pod yet, no. There is a green cemetery in Georgia, in the Atlanta area, and they are licensed differently than we are. They don't use vaults, and they use kind of the basket weaves for caskets. And you can't put like a bronze marker there. You'd have to put a more natural stone there. But we're not licensed to do green burials, but as far as cremains, we can bury cremains. I haven't heard of the tree pod, but yeah, we would have access to an area that we could do that in. We love trees. We plant trees with Trees Atlanta every year.
Well, thank you so much for presenting.
Okay, well, thank you. My time is running out. I hope you all have any other questions. Contact me. It's Winnie, W-I-N-I, at southviewcemetery.com. And I always tell everybody cemetery has all E's. People want to say A-R-Y, but it's E-R-Y. If you have any other questions, please let me know. And if you want to bring a group out to do something, we will coordinate with you and make that happen. Thanks very much for listening.